Smoke seen for miles after a massive explosion and fire took out more than a dozen UPS trucks and an entire building in Lancaster, California. Investigators believe the fire started in the UPS facility's main building and then spread to several other trailers. Going backwards, a major reversal for one city bringing back an indoor mask mandate as the highly contagious Omicron subvariant and two new subvariants cause COVID cases to surge once again. Why Philadelphia is making the step now, and could other cities follow suit? Crisis after crisis linked to the war in Ukraine. The concern now, a possible global food shortage. How Russia's relentless attacks are driving up grocery prices around the world.
Is Russia targeting Ukrainian agriculture in this war, and how, if so?
It does, and they do it in several directions.
Mounting questions about an NFL quarterback's death. The search for new clues after 24-year-old Dwayne Haskins was hit and killed by a dump truck while trying to cross a highway on foot. Putting an end to ghost guns. Tonight, the president launched a nationwide crackdown to curb firearms made without traceable serial numbers, blamed for the growing number of crimes across the country. More women left their jobs during the pandemic than men, and many still have not returned. Now, as more Americans go back to the office, we look at why caregiving for both children and for adult family members is still keeping some women on the sidelines.
It was a pretty simple decision. Yeah, we've got to do what's best for him.
27 universities, $4 million in scholarships, and one sensational high school senior with a big choice to make. I talked to this teen phenom with a bright future ahead.
So I would say that I found the passion just in being curious about the world. I found a way to channel that curiosity into science, and that soon blossomed into engineering. And then from there, I really learned that I could use engineering to help people.
One of his inventions is already helping people. You'll hear about that in just a moment. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. We begin tonight with the battle against that highly contagious Omicron subvariant. More than half of the country has seen an increase in cases by at least 10% in just the past week. The Northeast bearing the brunt of the new cases. Today, Philadelphia became the first major city to reinstate an indoor mask mandate after dropping it just last month. The daily infection rate there is up 50%. College campuses are also moving to require masks in classes again in response to a surge in D.C. Today, American University announced the new guidance. This comes on the heels of Georgetown, Johns Hopkins, Rice, and Columbia all instituting similar policies in the last few days. And with that D.C. outbreak spreading, now, at least 80 people, including the mayor of New York, have tested positive after the gridiron dinner there. All this comes as the World Health Organization is tracking two new subvariants so far only detected overseas. Eva Pilgrim leads us off tonight.
With rapidly rising COVID infections fueled by the BA2 variant, tonight, Philadelphia becoming the first major city to reinstate an indoor mask mandate.
It's my hope that our actions today will slow the spread of COVID and help us avoid seeing our ERs once again get so crowded that people can't get timely care when they need it.
But the reversal on masks leaving many here frustrated.
And I just wish the city would pick one thing and stick to it.
It comes as a wave of infections on college campuses is prompting schools like Columbia, Georgetown, American, and Johns Hopkins universities to bring back masks. And in the nation's capital, the COVID outbreak's still growing. At least 24 lawmakers and administration officials have recently been infected. Several had attended the elite gridiron dinner, where at least 80 guests have since tested positive, including the mayor of New York. So far, there are no reports of serious illness. President Biden did not attend that dinner, but he was with Nancy Pelosi last week, who then tested positive. Today, Pelosi getting her first negative test, and the president continues to test negative.
Remember, he's fully vaccinated, he's doubly boosted, and most of the time people who get anywhere near him need to be tested. So we feel the protocol is a reasonable protocol.
New COVID cases are creeping up across 26 states and territories. Hospital admissions up in 11 states, but the data is spotty, and some experts fear the numbers are higher. During the peak of Omicron, 2.6 million Americans were being tested every day. Today, it's just over 500,000.
And I think that we're dramatically undercounting cases. We're probably only picking up up 1 in 7 or 1 in 8 infections. So when we say there's 30,000 infections a day, there's probably closer to 250,000 infections a day.
Still, Dr. Ashish Shah, the new White House COVID response coordinator, is encouraged that the reported number of Americans in hospitals is relatively low.
Hospitalizations right now are the lowest they have been in the entire pandemic. I never like to see infections rising. I think we got to be careful, but I don't think this is a moment where we have to be excessively concerned.
Some assuring words there from Dr. Jha. Eva joins us now. And Eva, those are some big moves by the city of Philadelphia and also those universities making a return to indoor masking. Now the TSA is also considering extending their federal mask mandates for planes, buses, and trains.
The TSA mandate is set to expire next Monday, and health officials are monitoring the rising number of COVID cases. The decision on whether or not to extend that mask mandate will be made by the CDC director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. Lindsay.
All right, Eva Pilgrim, our thanks to you. Now to the war in Ukraine and the shocking new revelation tonight about the possible death toll in Mariupol. New drone video shows the damage in that theater that was bombed by the Russians last month. And tonight, the mayor of the city says as many as 20,000 citizens may have died in his city. As Russia is shifting its offensive eastward, Ukrainian officials are urging people to evacuate while they still can. James Longman reports in from Kyiv tonight.
Tonight, the shocking toll on Mariupol becoming all too clear as the Russians ready a new assault on eastern Ukraine. There are tens of thousands of dead in Mariupol after more than 6 weeks of Russian attacks, although it's impossible to know for sure. 4 friends who managed to escape the city recorded the daily horrors in a video diary. They lived in the ruins of buildings to escape the shelling and scavenged for scraps of food in bombed-out supermarkets. One of the friends described the shelling. We were walking and it was everywhere, he said. Over our heads, then behind us. We laid in a ditch to survive. Somehow we managed to survive and escape. Military experts say Russia plans to occupy and control Ukrainian cities like Mariupol along the southeast to create a land bridge with Crimea, which they annexed in 2014. It comes as thousands more Russian troops are massing. This 8-mile-long convoy of military vehicles is heading for Izium and the Donbass, much of these areas already decimated by Russian shelling. The Russian offensive is being led by General Alexander Dvornikov, known as the Butcher of Syria, because he commanded Russian troops there to save the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The campaign gained infamy for the indiscriminate aerial bombardment of civilian areas. While the war in the east enters a new grim phase, outside Kyiv, Brigadier General Valery Embakov's spirits are high.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
His troops beat back Russian forces from the capital. He gave us an exclusive look at how they did it. Right here on this spot, he says, from that farm, our boys used these javelins to do what you now see behind me. He tells us 2 Russian tank columns were headed down this road when his troops ambushed them, stopping the Russian advance.
You're very proud of your victory here. Yes. But are you as confident about the war that's starting in the east?
Yes, he says, but Ukraine has different needs now. Ukraine needs more modern weapons, he says. In the first stage, our needs were mostly defensive, anti-tank weapons, anti-air weapons. Now we need heavy offensive weaponry, tanks, planes, artillery systems. More weapons, he says, to stop a repeat of this. Terrible devastation all around the Kyiv region.
Just imagine what this woman's been through. She's telling us her parents died of COVID 4 days apart last year. And now she's watched their house be destroyed.
As some residents return to the ruins of their homes, new dangers lie in wait.
We've been warned time and again about the possibility of mines and booby traps in this part of Ukraine. Well, we've come across what looks like it could be a trap on the other side of this door. Now, this was a school. It was being used by Russian troops. You see this string. It leads onto the front door there, and there could very well be a trap on the other side of there, a charge waiting to explode.
Ultimately, Russia failed in their objective to take Kyiv, but a Ukrainian victory in the east will be far more difficult.
That potential Russian mine at a school, no less. James Longman, kind enough to join us from Kyiv tonight. James, what do you know about this new Russian general who was just appointed?
Well, Lindsay, he's called Alexander Dvornikov, and he's known as the Butcher of Syria because he led Russian troops in Syria to support the regime of Bashar al-Assad. He was known for his tactic of indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas, and that is obviously a terrifying prospect now for the people of Ukraine. He's actually thought by American intelligence to already have been in operational command on Friday when we saw that cruise missile hit the Kramatorsk railway station here. That's left nearly 60 people dead, so perhaps a hint of what is to come. But I think it's fair to say that these are two very different theatres of combat. He is now leading an army of thousands of conscripts, whereas in Syria there were by and large a professional military. It was special forces who were, leading combat operations from the air. These are ground forces, and there's nothing to say necessarily that he'll be able to turn this war round for Russia. He is facing a very different adversary. These are people who have been well armed by the West with all kinds of different weapons that were not in Syria. So we'll wait and see if Russia can turn this fight round. He perhaps might not be necessarily in a position to improve the morale that we've seen Russian forces suffering from, or communications, logistics. None of those things necessarily will improve under his command. But I think it is a very, very terrifying, worrying prospect for the people of Ukraine that this is a man who led aerial bombardments on civilian neighborhoods in Syria, now leading Russia's campaign here. Lindsay?
Right, terrifying indeed. James Longman, our thanks to you and the work that you continue to do. ABC News contributor and retired General Robert Abrams joins us now. General Abrams, first of all, thank you so much for joining us again. He was an advisor to former U.S. Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel during the last invasion of Ukraine, and more recently was the head of U.S. forces in Korea. So Putin is now shifting into the east. What should we make of this new strategy?
Lindsay, good evening. I think this is, we should all recognize first and foremost, as everyone has stated, the initial objectives of Putin's campaign have failed miserably. He clearly wanted to decapitate the democratically elected government of Ukraine, and he was going to do so principally by attacking south from Belarus and Western Russia to seize and control Kyiv to take out the government. That has failed miserably, and now they're looking to salvage some sort of victory of some sort. And hence you've seen Russian forces pulled out of northern and western Ukraine, back into Belarus, into Russia, and now they're conducting reconstitution in an attempt to try to gain more terrain in the south, in particular to achieve control of the Donbass region.
We're almost 7 weeks into this war. Is this move in any way indicative of Putin admitting some sort of failure?
Well, I don't think he's ever going to publicly admit a failure. But in the court of international world opinion, it has been an abysmal failure. And he's got to save face for himself, for his legacy as the leader of his people. And he's got to make it matter for all the sacrifices that the Russian people have already made. 20,000 killed, probably another 50,000 wounded, some probably seriously wounded, not to mention all of the vehicles that have been destroyed. He's got to come away with something. And hence, that's why I think we're seeing this main effort reorganizing itself, reconstituting, as we call it, with an attempt to try to seize some additional ground in the south and the east.
And is that why taking over this portion of the region is so important to him at this point? To save face, if you will.
Yeah, I absolutely think it is. I mean, look, remember, the Donbass was one of the original target areas in 2014, and as ill-prepared as the Ukrainian army was at the time, they managed to hold them off, create a contact line, dig in their defenses, and hold them at bay for 8 years. And during that 8 years, the Ukrainian military has rearmed, refitted, received new equipment, and most importantly, been getting training from the United States and other NATO countries, and they are an excellent fighting force. So, but he's looking to, he's got to be able to point to something that he was able to achieve in this just senseless war in Ukraine.
So in your expertise, if Putin is able to gain control of the eastern part of Ukraine, what does that mean then for the rest of the country?
Well, I think it'll depend on where, when we say that line of control, where that line ends up being, Lindsay, to be honest with you. I think if you're President Zelensky, and he said this last week, that if that area is very close to the current contact line that we had prior to 24 February, that would be a way for Russia to save some face, and B, it would be a huge victory for Ukraine. So I think anything beyond that would be viewed by Russia as some sort of victory, and they'll probably couch it in terms of protecting additional indigenous Russian people living in eastern Ukraine.
What happened to the peace talks? Are those just off the table at this point?
Yeah, I think, there hasn't been a lot of reporting about it, and that's principally because Russia came in with a maximalist position that basically said, we want a pledge of neutrality, a pledge that you will not join NATO, and you're going to reduce your weaponry and so forth, and you're going to recognize that Russia has taken control of Crimea and has recognized the separatist region in the east. Of course, that is unacceptable to Ukraine. So I think they've been, prolonging these talks to see how the conflict actually ends. And in this case, I'd say Russia wants to drag it on as long as possible in the hopes that they can arrive at the negotiation table with a much stronger position. Because right now, the advantage is with Ukraine.
ABC News contributor and retired General Robert Abrams, we thank you so much for your time and insight. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lindsay.
President Biden announced new changes for so-called ghost guns, which have helped fuel the rise in gun violence across this nation. Some law enforcement groups have said ghost guns can easily be bought and assembled by minors and those who are not authorized to have a firearm. Now the administration is cracking down on the privately made untraceable weapons. Here's ABC's chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega.
President Biden in the Rose Garden today holding up a so-called ghost gun built with parts from a kit that can be ordered online.
It's not hard to put together. A little drill, hand drill at home. Doesn't take very long. A felon, a terrorist, a domestic abuser can go from a gun kit to a gun in as little as 30 minutes.
Often made on a 3D printer, ghost guns are impossible to trace in a crime. But today, for the first time in more than half a century, the White House expanding the federal definition of a firearm to now include ghost guns. The gun parts will now have serial numbers so they can be traced, and a background check will be required to buy a kit from a commercial dealer.
If you buy a couch you have to assemble, it's still a couch. If you order a package like this one over here, that includes the parts you need, the direction of assembling a functioning firearm, you bought a gun.
In New York City alone, police seizing 131 ghost guns so far this year. That's a staggering 351% increase from the same period last year. Just Friday, 16-year-old Anjali Jambo was fatally shot near her Bronx high school. A 17-year-old arrested, accused of opening fire with a ghost gun.
Law enforcement is sounding the alarm. Our communities are paying the price.
Cecilia Vega joins us now from the White House. Cecilia, you pressed the White House on this point earlier today, but they fully expect this new regulation to be challenged in court.
Yeah, they are bracing for that, Lindsay. The new rule is supposed to take effect later this summer. The White House says they are confident that it will stand up to any legal challenges. But look, we are already hearing from gun rights groups that are lining up in opposition. The NRA has come out with a scathing statement. They say this move is going to do little to stop the violence that we have seen in so many major American cities. You and I have been covering that for so long now. The NRA says they're calling this a gun ban. But look, the reality is this does not ban ghost guns. That's not what this rule does. In fact, on the other hand, Lindsay, we're hearing from the NYPD. They're praising this. One official saying that this is going to be a big help for all those officers who have been struggling to get these guns off American streets.
All right, Cecilia Vega, thanks so much. And still so many questions tonight in the tragic death of Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Dwayne Haskins. The 24-year-old was hit and killed by a dump truck while he was trying to cross a highway in South Florida on foot. Now investigators are trying to understand why he was walking along the busy roadway early Saturday morning. Here's ABC's Victor Oquendo.
Haskins takes off.
Tonight, authorities trying to determine why Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Dwayne Haskins was walking on the South Florida interstate just moments before he was fatally struck by a dump truck.
Vehicle versus pedestrian 595 westbound.
According to Florida Highway Patrol, the 24-year-old was walking on a limited access facility for unknown reasons early Saturday morning when he tried to cross the westbound lanes and was hit. Tonight, the sports world's in shock, including his former Ohio State coach.
Just a wonderful teammate, wonderful, obviously, player, but disregard the player piece. A great teammate, great friend.
Haskins was drafted in the first round in 2019 after leading Ohio State to a Rose Bowl victory. He played 2 seasons with Washington before joining the Steelers last year. ESPN reporting he was in Florida training with teammates. In a statement, Pittsburgh's head coach Mike Tomlin calling Haskins one of our hardest workers, both on the field and in our community.
Victor Oquendo joins us now. Victor, we've heard from Haskins' coach, and we're also hearing from some of his teammates as well. What are they saying?
Lindsay, by all accounts, he was beloved by his teammates and his former school, Ohio State University, where he played college football. Coming up on Saturday, they're actually going to be honoring Haskins during their spring game. Lindsay?
Victor Oquendo, our thanks to you. Next tonight, to a 1-2 punch of severe weather and the millions on alert this week as 2 storm systems bring a severe weather outbreak to a large portion of the heartland. ABC's chief meteorologist Ginger Z has the latest on a track on both storms. Hey, Ginger.
Hey there, Lindsay. We've already got our first tornado watch of the week up, and unfortunately, I think we are going to see many more. It also has a severe thunderstorm watch now tacked onto the back of it. Anywhere from North Texas right through Fort Smith, Hot Springs, and Little Rock, all included. Southeastern Oklahoma, too. This should expand east, but there's another storm we're watching, and this one has what we like to call a negative tilt. So it's going to really dig into the country, and what that will mean is a lot of cold air on the backside. We could see 1.5 feet plus of snow with blizzard conditions in North Dakota, which could break records. So yes, you get spring snow, but to get that much, it has been a while. And then you look at that tan line with the bubbles on it that goes through Kansas and Oklahoma. That's called a dry line. And right now the setup tries to instigate some storms. Any storm that gets going tomorrow, anywhere from Des Moines and Kansas City down to Dallas, Waco, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City, could be bad. Then you expand that on Wednesday to a much larger area, more populated: Chicago, Indianapolis, Memphis, Little Rock to Jackson, Mississippi. Lindsay, you look at this map and a busy week ahead and you say, oh my goodness, this spring feels like we've been talking about this week after week, and we have. March had 218 confirmed tornadoes, the most we have ever seen in recorded history in March.
It could be bad. Those are words that we never want to hear from you, Ginger, but thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
After a third weekend of massive flight cancellation, some airlines have said that they have cut flights for the busy summer travel season. This as prices continue to sharply rise. ABC's Gio Benitez has the latest on our nation's transportation woes.
Tonight, some airlines say they're cutting flights this summer to limit chaos at airports after yet another weekend packed with cancellations for JetBlue and Spirit. More than 600 canceled flights. JetBlue now cutting at least 8 to 10% of flights during the busy summer travel period. Alaska Airlines about 2%, in part because of pilot shortages. This, as experts say, the average airfare jumped by 40% since the start of the year and will rise another 10% by the end of May.
A tremendous amount of demand from travelers who have not been able to travel for the last 2 spring and summer seasons. And the second factor is jet fuel.
In fact, jet fuel prices are also up 40% since the beginning of the year, 76% since this time last year. But Scott Keyes, who monitors cheap flight prices, says not all hope is lost.
We are still seeing an abundance of cheap flights, even as they're creeping back up.
We're all clamoring for more of those cheap flights. Gio Benitez joins us now. And Gio, the airlines have blamed bad weather, pilot shortages, but what's the reason behind those shortages?
So, Lindsay, the bottom line is here that during the pandemic, many pilots retired. And then, of course, you had travel rebounding very, very quickly. So now airlines are scrambling. They're trying to find new pilots to hire and train, and that takes time. Lindsay.
Makes a lot of sense. Gio Benitez, our thanks to you. And when we come back, listen to this. This self-driving car pulled over by cops that still tried to make a run for it. Also, the mass strike at online retailer Etsy, why thousands of sellers are going on a temporary vacation. But first, while the war in Ukraine wages, our trip into Ukraine's heartland to see up close the front lines of a different looming humanitarian disaster, a global food crisis, and the ripple effects that we're already feeling here at home.
With so much at stake, so much on the line, more Americans turn here than any place else. ABC News World News Tonight with David Muir, America's #1 most watched newscast, now streaming on ABC News Live.
It was a scary time. In the 70s, you had multiple bodies showing up in Los Angeles.
There were so many murders happening. You had to have a name for it, serial killer.
There was a human head in there. This was premeditated evil.
We have this clock. This person is going to do this again.
It's me against the killer. Who's going to win?
We'll see who laughs last.
What came next was unlike anything they had ever seen.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
The hottest views in daytime are happening right here.
We talk about things on this show that people don't talk about.
That I can't wait to see. Honest takes from strong women.
We need all hands on deck, and we need it right now. This is the time to speak out.
Unafraid to get real.
We stick by our points of view.
We're all seeing it differently, and that's the beauty of The View.
And that's why the most watched #1 daytime talk show is The View. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
Is that the gun?
That's not the gun.
What is it? I won't ask you again, then. Are you a Nazi?
The deeper you go into the black markets,
You put your life at risk.
the darker it gets.
Why hasn't anyone come out and spoken?
It's about the money. That's why we do it.
Trafficked. New episodes Wednesdays at 9 on National Geographic.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now. America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
The future is upon us, at least in the San Francisco Bay Area. Take a look at this video. Police pulled over a car on a busy night only to find out that it was a self-driving vehicle with no driver inside. As officers tried to figure out what to do, the car then tried to make a dash for it. The self-driving car company Cruise says the vehicle was simply attempting to get to the nearest safe location for the traffic stop as intended. Cruise says no ticket was issued. Now to another front in the Ukraine war, the battle for Ukraine's farmers to keep the world fed. Known as Europe's breadbasket, Ukraine is one of the world's largest exporters of grain, and Russia's invasion attacks are already spiking global food prices. So ABC News Live anchor Terry Moran traveled to the heart of Ukraine to talk to the farmers who are desperately trying to keep their crops going as war rages all around them.
As the war in Ukraine grinds on and the human toll mounts, there is another humanitarian disaster looming, a global food crisis. Food prices around the world are already rising at the fastest pace in history, and it could get worse. The USDA is now predicting that Americans will pay between 4.5% and 5.5% more for food this year. Every day the war lasts, world food supplies are damaged. Because Ukraine is an agricultural powerhouse, a top 10 exporter of wheat, corn, soybeans, barley, sunflower oil, and poultry. Russia is an even bigger player in global agriculture. So with the war in Ukraine and the punishing sanctions on Russia combined, almost all that food could be gone from world markets this year, driving up prices and threatening hunger in many countries that depend on the food grown here. At the NATO summit last month, President Biden warned of the coming crisis.
Yes, we did talk about food shortages, and it's going to be real.
So what happens here on Ukraine's farms in the coming months will be crucial.
They're planting sugar beets in this field. The planting season then, it's corn, it's soybeans, sunflowers, and wheat. But the question is, will they be able, with the war, to grow it, harvest it, get it to market, and to the global markets, so dependent on what they do here?
We traveled from our base in the city of Lviv in western Ukraine, 300 miles into Ukraine's heartland and the town of Kryzhyopil to see how farmers are coping. Mile after mile, we drove through Ukraine's seemingly endless fields and farms. 70% of this country is farmland, an area larger than the entire nation of Italy. The front lines are far away, but the war isn't. There are checkpoints all along the highways and even on back roads. A billboard in English on the outskirts of a city. Russia is killing our children. And in a tiny village, a scene from another era. 68-year-old Zina Borodai washing clothes in the river the old way, scrubbing them on the rocks. She tells us her grandson Maxim, whom she raised, is in the army, and she worries, of course. How do you think this will end? We just hope for peace, she says. Let us pray to God for peace. Not far away, we're back in the 21st century.
You are very high tech.
Andrei Kapritsa farms about 3,000 acres, corn, sunflowers, sugar beets. He's using satellites, sensors, and GPS to monitor and manage his fields. And like so many Ukrainian farmers, he is improvising and adjusting as fast as he can to the new reality of war. Andrei understood the war would drive up prices for seeds and fertilizers, so he bought early. And look at these old fuel tanks. Andrei's refurbishing them.
You just bought these tanks in order to have fuel because you know that the Russians are targeting the fuel supply here.
Yeah. Fuel refineries and depots have been attacked by Russia across the country, and Ukrainian authorities believe it's not just for military purposes. Is Russia targeting Ukrainian agriculture in this war, and how, if so?
It does, and they do it in several directions.
Deputy Agriculture Minister Taras Vysotsky says Russia has struck at least 6 grain storage facilities, destroyed farm machinery, mined fields, and shelled countless others, like this one in eastern Ukraine. Near Zaporizhia, farmers are clearing artillery shells from their fields and driving tractors in body armor. But most damaging of all, Russia has blocked and bombed Ukraine's ports. 70% of Ukraine's exports and 99% of its corn exports are shipped from ports on the Black Sea, from Odessa to Mariupol. And those ports are all being blocked and attacked by Russia, none more savagely than Mariupol. Victoria Melnik's husband, Alexander, died defending Mariupol. He was so handsome, she tells us. He was a good man. I miss him so much. Victoria lives in a farm village. She's 21. Her baby boy, Marek, is 6 months old. Through tears, Victoria tells us Alexander's body remains in Mariupol, unable to be evacuated home because of the Russian siege. I just wish that no other mother, sister, wife, or daughter would ever experience this kind of grief, she says. And she adds, I want my son to grow up and know where his father's grave is. It's spring, a season of hope. But this year, as one farmer told us, these fields are the second front line. And this land, it's part of the soul of Ukraine. Alexander Sali farms a few acres organically at the edge of town.
You love this land?
Yes, he tells me.
Would you defend it if the Russians came here?
I am not a military man, he says, but if they are going to take away our land, we will defend it. Then Alexander and his wife Ludmilla and their kids Kirill and Anastasia. It's her 9th birthday today. Ask us inside for some cake. And organic tea Ludmilla brews from wildflowers just outside her door.
Nice to see you.
We say goodbye. This is what Ukrainians are fighting for. This land, their homeland.
Such widespread implications of this war. Our thanks to Terry Moran for that. Still ahead here on Prime, the tens of millions on the line as the trial involving actor Johnny Depp and his ex-wife actress Amber Heard gets underway. But first, the painstaking hour-by-hour work to try and free a container ship that's been stuck in the mud in the Chesapeake Bay for nearly a month. We go by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day. Zoe from Sesame Street wishing a happy National Pet Day with her pet Rock Rocco somewhere Elmo is fuming. Google it if you don't know why.
The deeper you go into black markets, the darker it gets.
Trafficked, Wednesdays at 9 on National Geographic.
Right now, with so much at stake, Sunday mornings, this is the place. Taking on all the tough questions. Straightforward reporting. No spin, no hype, no bull. Thank you for making ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
It was a scary time in the 70s. You had multiple bodies showing up in Los Angeles.
There were so many murders happening. He had to have a name for it, serial killer.
There was a human head in there. This was premeditated evil.
We have this clock. This person is going to do this again.
It's me against the killer. Who's going to win?
We'll see who laughs last.
What came next was unlike anything they had ever seen.
Is that the gun?
That's not the gun.
What is it? I won't ask you again then. Are you a Nazi? The deeper you go into black markets,
You could be putting your life at risk.
the darker it gets.
Why hasn't anyone come out and spoken?
It's about the money. That's why we do it.
Trafficked, new episodes Wednesdays at 9 on National Geographic.
These days, with so much going on, it's hard to keep up.
While others are recapping yesterday's headlines,
We're bringing you the right now.
This is the busy border crossing. Steel barricades, another strike.
The Right Now look at the day ahead, how it affects you and your family.
Record high gas prices.
The threat of cyber warfare.
Is peace possible?
World News Now beginning at 2 a.m. Eastern, followed by America This Morning.
America's #1 early morning news.
Streaming here on ABC News Live.
Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
I risked my life. If I was caught, they would have put a bullet in my head.
That would have been one of the most deadly acts of domestic terrorism ever in the United States.
He put himself in jeopardy for us.
Welcome back, everyone. Now to the container ship still stuck in the Chesapeake Bay for nearly a month. Let's take a look by the numbers. The Ever Forward ship has been stuck for 4 weeks off the coast of Maryland after it ran aground after a wrong turn and has been unable to get free despite several refloating efforts using barges and tugboats. Loaded with 5,000 containers, crews are now taking 4 to 5 containers an hour off of the ship with the hopes of lightening its load and raising it out of the mud. Officials hope only 500 containers have to be removed before they're able to get it free. The ship owners have invoked maritime laws requiring the cargo owners to help share the cost of freeing the ship. So far, though, there have been 0 reports of injuries or damage to the ship or its cargo, and the grounded ship has not blocked any navigation routes out of Baltimore Harbor. The ship, ironically named Ever Forward, also happens to be the sister ship of the Ever Given, which you'll remember spent 6 days stuck sideways in the Suez Canal last March, blocking that critical international trade route. And we still have lots to get to here on Prime tonight. Our in-depth report on the growing number of women who have left jobs during the pandemic sick and why their new responsibilities may mean they will not be returning to work anytime soon. The happy ending to a terrifying ordeal after 2 teenagers were swept out to sea. And looking for a little inspiration this Monday, we meet a Florida teen who was accepted to 27 colleges, including Harvard and MIT. But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
Powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, the hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
My wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know?
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it. Feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a 3rd hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I know what happened, and I'm not guilty.
Why the fascination with criminal trials? Figure out what's really out there.
She revealed she had murdered his family.
I know in my heart that he did this.
It's the time of suspicion.
The ending's really tough.
You don't know whether truth is going to be difficult to find unless you try to find it.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
As Russia starts to reinforce its troops in eastern Ukraine, gruesome discoveries in the mountains of debris left in their wake. Ukrainian police officers collecting the bodies of civilians who were killed in Makariv just outside of Kyiv. In the besieged port city of Mariupol, the mayor says more than 10,000 civilians have died, and says the actual death toll could be more than 20,000. These 4 friends say they recently escaped Mariupol after spending weeks searching for relatives in the destroyed city, scavenging for food in shelled supermarkets. Russia now pushing full steam ahead in the eastern part of the country. U.S. officials warn their troops are likely regrouping in the Donbass region. Russia implementing a new commander in charge of the war who led Russian forces in Syria.
He and other senior Russian leaders have shown clearly in the past their disregard for avoiding civilian harm, their utter disregard in many ways for the laws of war.
An update from Texas over an abortion case making headlines. A district attorney saying he will ask a judge to have murder charges dropped against a woman for her alleged self-induced abortion. A Starr County grand jury indicted that woman last month.
The legal drama between former Hollywood couple Johnny Depp and Amber Heard enters a new phase as the 2 sides face off in a Virginia courtroom. Depp is suing Heard for $50 million, claiming she defamed him. The Pirates of the Caribbean star filed the lawsuit against Heard in 2019 after she published an op-ed in the Washington Post writing from the perspective of quote, a public figure representing domestic abuse. The op-ed does not identify her ex-husband by name, but lawyers for Depp say Heard damaged his reputation, claiming that because of the allegations of abuse, Mr. Depp lost movie roles and faced public scorn. The former couple's saga dates back to 2016, when Heard submitted photos of herself with a bruised face in court as she obtained a restraining order against Depp. He called the abuse claims categorically false, claiming they were a hoax to generate publicity for Heard's career. This weekend, Heard defended the Washington Post op-ed, writing, "I never named him. Rather, I wrote about the price women pay for speaking out against men in power. I continue to pay that price."
This one out of California was caught on camera. Fishermen coming to the aid of two young swimmers who were almost swept out to sea. The fishermen say they noticed the 16-year-olds in the water while catching salmon at Salina State Beach in California on Thursday. A rip current swept the girls far away from the shoreline. By the time the fishermen got to them, the girls had been in the 50-degree water for at least 30 minutes.
Thank God we were there. So we came, oh my God, the poor little girls were so cold.
One young lady said she couldn't feel her legs, and so, so it was, they didn't have a lot of time left.
The men say they only came across the girls because they decided to stay in the water longer to catch one more salmon.
More than 14,000 Etsy sellers are going on strike. They're protesting a hike in the company's commission fee. Sellers are angry the fee is jumping from 5% to 6.5%. Nearly 50,000 people signing a petition demanding Etsy cancel the increase. Organizers are asking sellers to go on vacation mode and for buyers to boycott the site until next Monday.
A new name etched in golf history.
Scheffler outshines them all.
American Scottie Scheffler won his first major, the Masters, on Sunday, coronated with that coveted green jacket. Completing the tournament at 10 under par, the 25-year-old Texas native led all weekend and held off Rory McIlroy in the final stages. He had to overcome some nerves, a 4-putt on the 18th before sealing the deal to a thunderous applause.
It's a dream come true just to be in the field this week and to have the honor of winning. I really can't put into words, and I'm so thankful just to be a part of such a great event.
Major news from pop star Britney Spears, who appears to have announced in an Instagram post today, quote, "I am having a baby." This comes months after Spears was released from her conservatorship, which she had said during shocking testimony last year had restricted her from having a third child. Her partner, Sam Asghari, seemingly confirmed Britney's post, saying that he's looking forward to fatherhood as it's the most important job he'll ever do. Now to the pandemic's ongoing impact on the economy and efforts to return to work. More women left their jobs during the pandemic than men, but a larger share of women still have not returned. And as the Washington Post recently reported, caregiving for both children and for adult family members is a driving force for keeping some women on the sidelines. Here's ABC's Karen Travers.
Now hiring signs fill storefront windows around the country. But for some Americans, staying on the sidelines is still the better option.
Early in the pandemic, Leslie Williams quit her job as a bookkeeper for a Seattle lumber company. She offered to take care of her grandchildren every day when schools shut down so her adult children could continue working. It was a difficult decision.
Who doesn't want to be a paid Grammy? But I really liked my job. It was a good place to work for. I had a lot of friends there. On the other hand, we didn't want to expand our bubble any more than we had to.
Like so many Americans, the pandemic shifted Leslie's priorities. Her children matching her salary and benefits to stay home and watch the toddlers instead.
We have a great backyard for the kids to play in. I still have some strong relationships with people that I used to work with. But yeah, it has been a little isolating.
Leslie, now 61, explains she misses her job, but doesn't see herself returning to bookkeeping for the lumberyard anytime soon due to her new normal.
Childcare is really expensive in the Seattle area. It's a big chunk of change. It's a big part of your paycheck, unless you're a professional pulling in a good salary.
Others are trying to get back into the workforce, but caregiving obligations make that job hunt more difficult than ever.
Courtney Russell left her job in retail near the onset of the pandemic when her husband Doug's cancer returned.
It was a pretty simple decision. Yeah, we've got to do what's best for him.
Now settled in a home care routine, Courtney began applying for jobs in January that she says she's overqualified for. But 4 months and 75 interviews later, still no offers.
I spent 25 years in retail, so I know how HR works. I know how it is to find a job. It's a lot of overqualified, I hear constantly, which drives me absolutely crazy. Because when I was a store manager, I hired people that were overqualified because it made my job easier.
Doug explains Courtney's been upfront about his health during interviews, and he believes it's preventing her from getting hired.
Listening to her on the phone, I can definitely tell that the tone of the conversation changes after she brings me up. And then the phone call ends very soon.
Last month, President Biden made this declaration.
Americans are back to work.
But not everyone is. Lindsay and Courtney are two of the millions of Americans who are not working because they're caring for someone else, including parents and spouses. The Washington Post reporting there are 4 times as many Americans out of work taking care of adult family members than those who stopped working to care for children during the pandemic.
About 1/4 of America's workforce is still out of a job for caregiving reasons.
And in the broad picture of the nation's employment, women are lagging. Most of the nation's 6.6 million jobs gained since President Biden took office have gone to men. As of early February, there were still 1.4 million fewer employed adult women in the workforce compared to 500,000 fewer adult men. Parenting seems to be a significant factor. Women with children were 3 times as likely to leave their jobs early on in the pandemic compared to fathers. The COVID pandemic has been especially hard on women in high-stress, low-pay service jobs, like childcare. We brought you some of their stories last fall.
Who wants to come into this field right now? Like, no way. When you're seeing signs at Wawa will pay you $15, $17 an hour.
We're talking about highly qualified professional teachers who are making salaries that are ridiculous and shameful. We should be ashamed.
One potential bright spot for women, some experts say this is a great opportunity for those that are higher skilled.
Facing staffing crunches, employers are scrambling to find skilled employees, and they may be willing to entertain flexibility they weren't before.
If you are in certain industries that have high need right now, they want to bring you in no matter what. And that means you need to request that you work remotely some part of the time because you and your spouse are sharing childcare duties. That employer is going to make it happen.
Companies are searching for good people. And I would think that you would want the people that are driven and compassionate because it would make your business better.
Our thanks to Karen for that. Every spring, of course, high school seniors across the country decide where they're going to go to college to further their education. For Jonathan Walker, though, it's a little more difficult to just pick one university. That's because this 18-year-old from Panama City, Florida, has been accepted to 27 of the most prestigious colleges in the country, including Stanford, Harvard, Yale, Duke, and MIT. He was accepted to every school he applied to and received $4 million worth of scholarships. That teen phenom joins us now. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
So let's start with the application process. When you applied to all 27 schools, were any of them reach schools, or you felt confident that you'd get into all of them?
Oh, no, like, being honest, I thought that all of them are reach schools. They're so difficult to get into. If I could get admission into one of them, I would have been super thankful.
So when you started getting the acceptances, yes, 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 accepted, 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 what was your response?
I mean, time after time, I would just say that it was just surprise just to see that they were interested in me and they wanted me to attend their institution, that they were offering me admission. And so I wouldn't say that, like, I got used to it. Each time that I got into a new school, it was just a ton of excitement.
How did you decide which schools that you were going to apply to?
Well, so I found out something that, so every time I went, like, I researched a school, I would find something that I liked about them. And so every school on my list, I could see myself there. And so I didn't apply to anywhere that I don't think I would be happy at. And so I just made a list and I started applying to them.
And you're obviously extremely versatile. You were crowned homecoming king. You're involved in the science club, the International Baccalaureate program, and you're also on the varsity football team. What is it that drives you?
I would just say that I've been blessed with God with a lot of ability. And so, I mean, I just want to take the time and use it to the fullest extent and just affect others, positively affect them, and try and inspire other people. And so I'm just thankful for the positions I've been put in. And I mean, just being in such a great opportunity surrounded by amazing people, I can't help but feel fueled.
And you're very enthusiastic about sciences and academics. You're working on getting a patent for one of your inventions. Last year, you won a national competition with another invention, a secure prescription drug management device. How did you find this passion? And tell us about your invention, if you can, if there's a patent on it already.
Right. So I would say that I found the passion just in being curious about the world. And so my parents, they bought me a chemistry set a couple of years ago whenever I was in middle school. And so I found a way to channel that curiosity into science, and that soon blossomed into engineering. And then from there, I really learned that I could use engineering to help people. And so I just became super interested in creating devices that could help disadvantaged communities and people going through difficult problems. And that's just turned into me creating different devices. And so the device that I'm currently working on with a partner, his name's Alex Johnson, and he's at Yale right now, but it's basically like a wrist-held braille device where people who are blind and deaf can facilitate their communication with the outside world, so that they're not only able to communicate with interpreters, but somebody can come up to them on the street and they're able to communicate with them. Instantaneously. Yes, ma'am, exactly.
Oh, that's phenomenal. Do you know yet what you're going to major in?
So that's something I'm definitely trying to explore. I would say if I were to stick within like predefined lines, I'm mostly interested in engineering as well as entrepreneurship, hopefully going down like a nonprofit route, creating devices to help people. But I'm also exploring the possibility of creating my own major, since I have a ton of different interests and I don't want to leave any of them out whenever I'm in college.
So what would that be? If you could create your own major, what might that be?
As far as the name, I'm not exactly sure yet, but I would really like to incorporate like the design portion of engineering, as well as learning about psychology to learn how humans interact with machines, as well as just marketing so that I can sell products to generate money, and just anything else that I'm really interested in. Like, I'm also interested in cinematic arts, which I wouldn't have said a couple of years ago, but just as I've continued to grow, there's a ton of interesting things about the world, and I just like to explore it all.
When do you think that you're going to make a decision about college, and how will you go about making that decision?
Right. So it's definitely been like a ton of pros and cons lists. I've been trying to narrow it down. I've been able to narrow it down slightly, but I wouldn't say that it's like by any like measure of impact. Like it's not like any type of, I haven't been able to like lower any amount that it's helped me make like a clear decision. I'm just trying to get a feel from the school, from visits, about where I think that I would fit in, where I could see myself. And so hopefully sometime in the next couple of weeks, I'll be able to make a pretty confident decision.
Well, Jonathan, congratulations. What an accomplishment. Super excited for you. We know that big things are in store in the future, and so we really appreciate you talking with us and coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Before we go tonight, the image of the day. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's actually a group of senior skydivers. Take a look at this. More than 100 skydivers between the ages of 60 and 78. They took a record-breaking attempt high above Paris, California. They jumped from 18,000 feet in the hopes of setting the record for largest free fall formation with 107 seniors. The group tried 7 times, and on the last attempt, they were just 1 person short of the formation. They say they'll try it again, though, next year. And that is our show for this hour. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Coming up in the next hour, we're staying on top of a few things. One remarkable discovery: the man stolen at birth returns to Chile to connect with a family he never knew he had. Also, the heroic school resource officer who stepped in to help a student just when they needed it most.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms. More Americans choose ABC News, America's #1 news source. Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
The deeper you go into the black markets, the darker it gets.
Traffic, Wednesdays at 9 on National Geographic.
He thought he was God.
He's now one of the most vilified men in the world. He is the everyman. Zelensky is the Tom Hanks of Ukraine.
The fact that a little nice Jewish boy is 5'7" is showing up this KGB agent in the Kremlin.
What do you say to Americans who see Russia and you not only as a rival, but an unfriendly adversary?
Two men at war.
Which Vladimir will take over. The world is not going to be the same.
Christopher Steele.
The guy who picked a fight with 2 presidents, and he's lived to tell the tale. That now infamous dossier.
Supposedly a tape showing prostitutes hired by Donald Trump urinating on a bed, and would be quite a tape if it in fact existed.
I said take out the PP tape.
It quickly became a question of how much of this was accurate.
This is the stuff of movies.
A lot of this is the stuff of movies. A story of epic proportions.
Phony stuff.
It's a bunch of crap. It changed history.
Hi there, I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We're monitoring several developments here at ABC News at this hour. Philadelphia has become the first major city to reinstate its indoor mask mandate after a sharp increase in COVID infections. More than half of the country has seen an increase in cases by at least 10% in the past week, with the Northeast bearing the brunt of the new cases. College campuses are also moving to require masks in classes again. Dr. Fauci warns it's up to each person to decide what risks are acceptable. Pacific Gas and Electric, the nation's largest utility, has agreed to pay more than $55 million to avoid criminal prosecution for 2 major wildfires sparked by its aging Northern California power lines and submit to 5 years of oversight in an attempt to prevent more deadly blazes. The company did not acknowledge any wrongdoing in the settlement announced Monday with prosecutors in 6 counties. The utility still faces criminal charges for a 2020 wildfire in Shasta County that killed 4 people. Take a look at this quick-thinking school resource officer who jumped right in to save a student's life. The surveillance video, which was just released by a North Carolina County Sheriff's Office, shows a young woman on the floor when the officer, a former combat medic for the U.S. Army Reserve, noticed she was choking. He performed the Heimlich maneuver, and a piece of candy dislodged. Now to the war in Ukraine and the shocking new revelation tonight about the possible death toll in Mariupol. The mayor of the city says as many as 20,000 citizens may have died in his city. This as Russia is shifting its offensive eastward. Ukrainian officials are urging people to evacuate while they still can. James Longman reports once again tonight from Kyiv.
Tonight, the shocking toll on Mariupol becoming all too clear as the Russians ready a new assault on eastern Ukraine. There are tens of thousands of dead in Mariupol after more than 6 weeks of Russian attacks, although it's impossible to know for sure. 4 friends who managed to escape the city recorded the daily horrors in a video diary. They lived in the ruins of buildings to escape the shelling and scavenged for scraps of food in bombed-out supermarkets. One of the friends described the shelling. We were walking and it was everywhere, he said. Over our heads, then behind us. We laid in a ditch to survive. Somehow we managed to survive and escape. Military experts say Russia plans to occupy and control Ukrainian cities like Mariupol along the southeast to create a land bridge with Crimea, which they annexed in 2014. It comes as thousands more Russian troops are massing. This 8-mile-long convoy of military vehicles is heading for Izium and the Donbass, much of these areas already decimated by Russian shelling. The Russian offensive is being led by General Alexander Dvornikov, known as the Butcher of Syria, because he commanded Russian troops there to save the regime of Bashar al-Assad. The campaign gained infamy for the indiscriminate aerial bombardment of civilian areas. While the war in the east enters a new grim phase, outside Kyiv, Brigadier General Valery Emberkov's spirits are high.
Nice to meet you.
His troops beat back Russian forces from the capital. He gave us an exclusive look at how they did it. Right here on this spot, he says, from that farm, our boys used these javelins to do what you now see behind me. He tells us 2 Russian tank columns were headed down this road when his troops ambushed them, stopping the Russian advance.
You're very proud of your victory here.
Yes.
But are you as confident about the war that's starting in the east?
Yes, he says, but Ukraine has different needs now. Ukraine needs more modern weapons, he says. In the first stage, our needs were mostly defensive, anti-tank weapons, anti-air weapons. Now we need heavy offensive weaponry, tanks, planes, artillery systems. More weapons, he says, to stop a repeat of this terrible devastation all around the Kyiv region.
Just imagine what this woman's been through. She's telling us her parents died of COVID 4 days apart last year. And now she's watched their house be destroyed.
As some residents return to the ruins of their homes, new dangers lie in wait.
We've been warned time and again about the possibility of mines and booby traps in this part of Ukraine. Well, we've come across what looks like it could be a trap on the other side of this door. Now, this was a school. It was being used by Russian troops. You see this string. It leads onto the front door there, and there could very well be a trap on the other side of there, a charge waiting to explode.
Ultimately, Russia failed in their objective to take Kyiv, but a Ukrainian victory in the east will be far more difficult.
Our thanks to James for that. And for more insight on what's happening inside Ukraine and the investigations into potential war crimes there, I'm joined now by Brian Kastner. Brian is a senior crisis advisor for Amnesty International, specializing in weapons and military operations. He recently returned from Ukraine. Brian, thank you so much for talking with us. I understand your trip was before the siege on Kyiv that was lifted. That must have been very difficult. But which areas were you able to access, and what did you see there?
Thank you for having me. So we were based in Lviv, but we were able to travel outside of the city to some of the surrounding towns, either to visit strike locations and also to visit people where they had settled after fleeing in the east. Really, our investigations were focused on war crimes, on the siege tactics that are being used by the Russians in places like Mariupol and Kharkiv and these cities that we know so well now. And so we were interviewing people about what they had seen as they were eyewitnesses and the people that they had lost, and you know, trying to build out the legal cases of these crimes.
And we've seen so many just horrific pictures coming out of Bucha. Was that an isolated event, or do you have indications that this kind of thing is much more rampant and happening elsewhere in Ukraine?
I think what we're going to discover as different Russian-occupied areas are relieved that there's different stories from different areas. Obviously, in Bucha and some of the surrounding suburbs, there have been just horrific crimes. It appears people that have been bound, people that have been shot. But in other parts of the country, say in Kherson in the south, people are trying to protest against the Russian occupation. And of course, I think we have only a tiny sliver of perspective of what is happening in Mariupol and Berdyansk and some of the other areas. So unfortunately, I think there's much more to come. But we also are only going to know kind of city by city and Russian unit by Russian unit. And that's what's really important to hear, is which Russian units and which Russian commanders are responsible for each of these crimes.
And all indications are that the Russian military is now preparing for a fresh offensive in eastern Ukraine. What lies ahead, do you believe, for the citizens who have not yet evacuated?
Unfortunately, what we've seen from other locations like Sumy or Kharkiv or Mariupol is you just have these crushing siege tactics. And here's what I want to stress. These siege tactics that the Russians use, and hopefully will not, but appear, you know, destined to be using in some other cities in eastern Ukraine, this is just one indiscriminate attack upon another. You know, any one of these attacks that we investigated, Amnesty, isolated on its own, would be its own war crime worthy of investigation and documentation and perhaps prosecution. But you just have these indiscriminate attacks day upon day, hour by hour, minute by minute in some locations. And so it's just a mountain of crimes. It's a mountain of evidence for us to parse through. And for the people living through it, they're just, you know, stuck in basements and bomb shelters. The only times they come outside are for food or water. And this is unfortunately when civilians die. The very few times they're outside, they're being hit by these indiscriminate attacks.
And there's so many questions about Friday's missile strike at the train station there in eastern Ukraine. From the information that you've been able to gather, though, was this just another Russian attack on civilians or something else?
Well, unfortunately, we're not able to conclusively prove it one way or another yet. Both Ukraine and Russia both used the missile that was used in this particular attack. And so we're continuing our investigation. I would just say, unfortunately, if it does eventually prove to be a Russian attack, it's not isolated. We have seen Russian attacks on civilian infrastructure before, and so it would just be part of a pattern.
And the path to possible war crime charges is certainly a long one. What are the important steps for the international community to take now in order to ensure that justice will eventually be brought to those responsible?
I think really the most important thing is preservation of evidence. And we've seen as these areas open, Bucha or others, obviously there's great interest in both from journalists and investigators to find out what happened, but also for civilians to return to their homes and see what's left of them, what's left of their, if their family members are still there when they've been cut communication. Obviously, there's an understandable rush, but as much as possible to be able to preserve the evidence, the physical evidence, but also being able to contact people about what happened. That's my concern, is that when the trials come, and they will come, we want to make sure that there's the evidence available for them to be fair and complete.
Brian Kastner, we thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you.
President Biden announced new changes for so-called ghost guns, which have helped fuel the rise in gun violence across the nation. Some law enforcement groups have said that ghost guns can easily be bought and assembled by minors and those who are not authorized to have a firearm. Now the administration is cracking down on the privately made untraceable weapons. Here's ABC's chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega.
President Biden in the Rose Garden today holding up a so-called ghost gun built with parts from a kit that can be ordered online.
It's not hard to put together. A little drill, hand drill at home. Doesn't take very long. A felon, a terrorist, a domestic abuser can go from a gun kit to a gun in as little as 30 minutes.
Often made on a 3D printer, ghost guns are impossible to trace in a crime. But today, for the first time in more than half a century, the White House expanding the federal definition of a firearm to now include ghost guns. The gun parts will now have serial numbers so they can be traced, and a background check will be required to buy a kit from a commercial dealer.
If you buy a couch you have to assemble, it's still a couch. If you order a package like this one over here, that includes the parts you need, the direction of assembling a functioning firearm, you bought a gun.
In New York City alone, police seizing 131 ghost guns so far this year. That's a staggering 351% increase from the same period last year. Just Friday, 16-year-old Anjali Jambo was fatally shot near her Bronx high school. A 17-year-old arrested, accused of opening fire with a ghost gun.
Law enforcement is sounding the alarm. Our communities are paying the price.
Our thanks to Cecilia for that. Now to the story of a remarkable discovery. A mother reunited with her baby boy 38 years after she was told he died in a maternity ward in Chile. Our Juju Chang was there as a sinister chapter in history led to an emotional family reunion.
Who was Tyler Graff before all this began?
Just an ordinary 38-year-old American man. I have a wife and kid. I work for the City of Houston Fire Department. I was adopted by a very loving, caring family. I think it was just knowing that my story did start before I was adopted. So it's kind of like missing the first 5 minutes of the movie.
After becoming a father, Tyler began trying to learn about his birth family. Suddenly, a call he never expected.
That must have been the shock of your life.
Yes. That's when they sat me down and told me who I was, how they know who I am, and what the true backstory really is.
Tyler had been stolen from his birth mother. She was told he died shortly after childbirth. The practice of coercive adoptions became widespread under dictator Augusto Pinochet's reign in Chile during the 70s and 80s. Thousands of babies taken, trafficked around the world through a complex network that included hospitals, the Catholic Church, and the Chilean government.
Judges, doctors, midwives, social assistants, they were all involved.
The American families, like Tyler's, say they had no idea that the baby they'd adopted had been stolen. When Tyler's birth mother, Hilda Quesada Godoy, realized that the baby boy she'd last laid eyes on in 1983 was actually alive, she couldn't believe it.
Quería gritar, me cuestioné muchas cosas. El pensar si él estuvo con cariño, comía bien, si pasaba frío.
Now, Tyler is heading to his birthplace, Chile, for the first time.
No story in Chile.
Hey.
Tyler meeting the sisters he never knew he had. Their family whole for the first time.
If anyone's gonna catch anything, it's my mom. They say she'll outfish anybody.
Transported, if only for a moment, to a life that could have been.
Cheers. To be a good mother, it doesn't take a fancy house, it doesn't take money. It's pretty simple. It's open arms and a huge heart, filled with nothing but support and love.
Our thanks to Juju for that. And still to come, a look around the world, including the latest developments in the high-stakes French election and remembering the life of the woman who typed up what became known as Schindler's List, helping to save hundreds of Jews from death.
It was a scary time. In the 70s, you had multiple bodies showing up in Los Angeles.
There were so many murders happening. You had to have a name for it, serial killer.
There was a human head in there. This was premeditated evil.
We have this clock. This person is going to do this again.
It's me against the killer. Who's going to win?
We'll see who laughs last.
What came next was unlike anything they had ever seen.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news, free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
National parks are incredibly safe places. Crime will happen.
Hey, my wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident.
There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
Now streaming on ABC News Live 2020. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues, The Hunt. True crime 2020. Now streaming on ABC News Live. Take America's #1 news with you, anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
Welcome back. We're tracking several headlines around the world. Authorities in Hong Kong today arrested veteran journalist Alan Au. Au was a contributor to Stand News, a pro-democracy online news platform shut down by the government last year. 2 other former Stand employees have already been charged with sedition. Hong Kong authorities have arrested nearly a dozen journalists just in the past year. French President Emmanuel Macron will face Marine Le Pen in the runoff for the presidency later this month. The first round voting results set up a repeat of 2017's battle over 2 sharply opposing visions for the country, Macron's centrist approach versus Le Pen's far-right nationalist stance. And in Israel, the secretary who typed the list of Jews saved by Oskar Schindler has died. Amy Reinhardt, whose role was depicted in the 1993 film Schindler's List, was 107 years old. Reinhardt, who was born in Austria, was one of 1,200 Jews Schindler famously saved from extermination in Nazi Germany. In recent years, the movement to eradicate offensive Native American language has sparked a national conversation. Nearly 2 months ago, the Washington NFL team announced its new name as the Commanders in the hopes of moving forward from a dark past. The new film, Imagining the Indian, the fight against Native American mascoting, explores the racial reckoning of using Native American names, images, and gestures in sports. Let's take a sneak peek.
Just a football team.
That to me is not honoring somebody. That to me is demeaning.
And if it was any other race of people, nobody would stand for it.
This insult is a door to racism. Change the name.
And joining us now is Suzanne Schoen-Harjo, Native American rights advocate, and Kevin Blackstone, American sports journalist, to discuss in further detail. Suzanne and Kevin, welcome to the show. Suzanne, let's start with you. The film addresses the misappropriation and history of Native culture in the world of sports. Why do you think in 2022 teams are still using Native American-themed mascots and chants?
Slow learners, I guess. We've changed over 2,000 of these, eliminated them entirely from the American sports scene. And you would think that by now, the first one was eliminated in 1970, Little Red at the University of Oklahoma. You would think that by now everyone would have caught on that these are just horrific slurs and the kind of racism that absolutely would not be allowed for anyone else. So I don't know why anyone would continue, but I think they'll start getting on the right side of history very quickly.
You know, we heard in that little clip there the idea of demeaning versus honoring. Where is the line?
Well, there's no honoring. There is zero honoring of us in any of this. It is identity theft. It's taking our religious and cultural iconography and using it for sport or using it around people who are just out of their minds, drunk. And these are not ways that we're taught to be in the world. And the way that things are related to us, we have nothing to do with that. We are not those mascots. And if anyone wants to honor us, they will remove all of them from the entire sports horizon and let everyone get back to being athletes.
And Kevin, in the documentary, you're seen speaking with a Washington Commanders fan who is adamant about the rebranding of the team's name. Let's take a look.
No matter what you say, or no matter what you do, Washington Redskins is always going to be the Washington Redskins. Get over it.
How difficult is it to have these kinds of conversations with people who say it's just a football team and this is not really offensive? How do you explain why it is?
Well, it's an educational process. I mean, I was born and reared in Washington, D.C. in a family that had season tickets to watch this team play from back in the 1950s. And I was in a progressive household. My father was very active in a lot of community organizing. In fact, he got the team in the 1960s to stop playing the song Dixie to open its games. So that's very much a part of who I am and who my family was. But it wasn't really until the 1990s when I tripped across a protest up in Minnesota before the Washington football team's last Super Bowl game in 1992 that I really began to think about the name of this team and how deleterious it was to the people who it was supposed to be honoring or supposed to be representative. So, you know, one of the reasons we did this film was because people have to be educated about the danger of these names. And also we wanted to highlight Suzanne's work on this issue for several generations now and point out to people that this is not a new fight. This is a very old fight, and that not only does it impact Native peoples in this country directly, but it also indirectly impacts how other people treat people of color in this country.
And Kevin, even as professional teams start to steer away from using native-themed mascots or names, more than 1,000 high school teams still continue to show resistance. Why do you think that that is, and what efforts do you propose should be done to move the conversation forward? I know you say it's an old conversation, so how do you continue to keep it alive?
Well, slowly but surely, you know, it is that educational process. And as people have become aware of the danger of the name, how insensitive it is, how insidious, how pernicious it is, they have begun to back away. People are very difficult to change for whatever reasons. But I don't so much look at the high schools that are still out there with the names as much as Suzanne pointed out, the number of high schools out there who have moved away from the names, and there are more and more each and every day. But, you know, it's just very difficult to change behavior of people that have been going on for a couple of generations.
And lastly, Suzanne, there have, of course, been some long overdue changes, like the Cleveland Indians changing their names to the Guardians in the past year, and, of course, the Washington football team. What gives you hope that this will continue to happen more often?
Well, because people are basically good. And once most people are told or have a realization that what they're doing is just awful to other people, they snap to and change. Then you're left with the people who say, so what? And those are the hardliners that will just never be educated. They don't want to be educated. They reject education, and those are the ones that you just have to hope understand something after change is made. We've eliminated more than half of these. Now we still have half to go, and we welcome anyone as an ally. But if you're just going to argue about it and keep telling us we're honored when we're saying our children are suffering from this, then go wait until we change all of them, and then just appreciate what has been done.
Suzanne and Kevin, we thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Imagining the Indian, the fight against Native American mascotting premieres this month. And still to come, the 25-year-old phenom stealing the show at the Masters, fending off a major challenge by one of the world's best golfers.
Right now, with so much at stake, Sunday mornings, this is the place. Taking on all the tough questions, straightforward reporting, no spin, no hype, no bull. Thank you for making ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos the #1 Sunday morning news show versus the competition.
Welcome to This Week.
Take America's #1 news with you, anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
She was diva, drama, money and fame, amazing, the prime housewife.
Then suddenly, we've seen a lot of things on The Real Housewives, but we've never seen anyone be arrested.
Unpredictable rich woman. Sign me up.
Ready for a little GMA-ish promo? Okay, here we go. GMA 7A every day with Robin, George, and Michael. That's how you start the day. Boom!
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
A major weekend at the Masters. Golfing great Tiger Woods made his return, and 25-year-old American Scotty Scheffler, the top-ranked player in the world, won his first big tournament. ABC's TJ Holmes takes us to the green.
A new name etched in golf history.
Scheffler outshines them all.
American Scotty Scheffler won his first major, the Masters, on Sunday, coronated with that coveted green jacket.
If you're going to choose a golf tournament to win, this would be the tournament I would want to win.
Completing the tournament at 10 under par, the 25-year-old Texas native led all weekend and held off Rory McIlroy in the final stages. He had to overcome some nerves, a 4-putt on the 18th before sealing the deal to a thunderous applause. The new champion shared the moment with a big hug and kiss with his wife, Meredith. Arguably another winner coming out of the weekend, Tiger Woods, finishing the week in his traditional Sunday red and getting a massive standing ovation on the 18th. A year ago, watching the Masters from his hospital bed, but over the weekend, defying the odds, completing his first tournament just a year after a devastating car crash that almost cost him his leg.
I don't think people really understand. The people who are close to me understand. They know what it takes to do this out here at this level.
After a great start, the five-time Masters champion finished the tournament far down the leaderboard, even putting up his worst-ever Sunday score at the Masters, a 6-over. At times, Woods was in obvious pain, wincing on occasion, limping, even using his golf club as a makeshift cane.
I don't quite have the endurance that I would like to have had. But, as of a few weeks ago, I didn't know if I was even playing this event.
The huge crowds clamored all weekend for a glimpse of the golf legend. But fans won't have to wait long to see him back in action, announcing he'll play at the Open in July.
It's been a tough road and one that I'm very thankful to have the opportunity to grind through it.
He'll be back out there again. Our thanks to TJ Holmes. And that is our show for tonight. Be sure to stay tuned to ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thank you so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.
America's #1 news, ABC.